Hello everyone, Bobby Redwood here again. Today's Improvement Action Network presentation is on the key elements of the SEP1 CMS core measure. There are two bundles with this measure, a 3-hour bundle and a 6-hour bundle. There's a lot of details here. We're not going to get into the weeds. This is an introductory lecture on the key elements. Within 3 hours of identifying sepsis, you're going to want to measure a lactate level. You're going to want to obtain blood cultures prior to administration of antibiotics, and you're going to want to administer broad-spectrum antibiotics. In severe sepsis or septic shock, you will also want to administer a 30 cc per kilogram crystalloid bolus. Severe sepsis is noted if patients have a lactate greater than 4, or if they're showing signs of end organ damage, altered mental status, EKG changes, a bump in creatinine. There are various others. The 6-hour bundle is really about reassessment and then applying vasopressors for shock. And so within 6 hours, if your patient drops their blood pressure less than 90, or if their mean arterial pressure drops less than 65, you're going to want to start vasopressor medications. And then you're also going to want to reassess the fluid volume status and tissue perfusion to make sure that your resuscitation is actually working. Also, if your lactate was initially greater than 2, you will want to remeasure lactate to gauge if that's going up or down as part of your resuscitative efforts. Here's a special note on the repeat assessment of volume status, since it is a bit complicated. Your physical exam for the repeat assessment must include vital signs, a cardiopulmonary exam, capillary refill documentation, peripheral pulse evaluation, and a skin exam. And you can look at the specific core measure to get more details on that. Also, it can include any two of the following: a central venous pressure measurement, a central venous oxygen measurement, a bedside cardiovascular ultrasound, or a passive leg raise or fluid challenge. WHA has put together some best practices, basically looked at successful hospitals throughout the state and said, here is what successful hospitals are doing to meet the sepsis core 1 measure. First, they're creating an interdisciplinary team that includes the ED, the ICU, and preferably the floor. A lot of complying with this measure has to do with teamwork. And so, for example, if you're drawing a repeat lactate, that order can be put in the ED, but if it's not performed, if the blood isn't actually drawn in the ICU, then you're going to fall out of the measure. And so you want to make sure that your team is doing a standardized handoff tool, that you have representatives from the ICU and the ED at your monthly sepsis meetings. Basically make sure that people are on the same page so these care processes actually happen. You're going to want to establish a process for routine screening in all patient areas with a standardized screening tool. So for example, in the ED, you're going to want to have your nurses doing screening for SIRS criteria and sources of infection. If those are positive, you're going to want to alert your physicians and have some sort of automated alert, preferably, so your physicians know when severe sepsis or septic shock has occurred, so they can intervene and start doing interventions like a 30 cc per kilogram bolus or a broad-spectrum antibiotic. Standardized care protocols for patients who screen positive are also a best practice, and that often involves order sets, computerized order entry, and even RN-initiated protocols. And just keep in mind that some populations are going to be excluded, so patients who transfer out are excluded, patients who die within 3 hours of arrival or of sepsis recognition are excluded, and patients who are placed on comfort care are also excluded. So this isn't just about meeting the metric, this is about providing good quality care. If a septic patient is DNR and critically ill and wants comfort cares, you're not going to have to be obsessed with meeting all of these metrics. This is information from one of our Wisconsin hospitals. They've been generous enough to share with us. And as you see, they started off pretty low at 25% on sepsis 1 measure, and over 6 months they got up to 50%. We're very proud of this hospital, actually. They have, every one of these bars tells the story of a plan, do, study, act cycle, where they were changing their protocols and changing their approach in order to generally nudge their way up. And while 50% might sound bad, right? You might say only half of the time they're meeting this measure. That doesn't mean they're not providing aggressive sepsis care. If you miss a single element of the measure, you fall off entirely. So if a patient was 100 kilos and they gave 2,999 cc's per kilogram of normal saline bolus, they would technically miss that measure. Does that mean they provided bad sepsis care? No. I mean, a lot of this is about meeting the metric exactly. And that's what we're here to help you do, is not only provide excellent care, but do it in a way that, that complies with the metric. Here we look at this member hospital's experience broken down actually by key elements. And if you look at the key elements, they're actually doing quite well, right? So in the fourth quarter of 2016, they had 50 septic patients. They only met the sepsis bundle 25% of the time, but they were meeting the 3-hour bundle 70% of the time. They were getting their lactate within 3 hours 80% of the time, their blood cultures 80% of the time, their broad spectrum antibiotics 75% of the time. So actually, the first part of the bundle, they're doing really well. And as you can see, they're lagging a little bit on the 6-hour bundle, the repeat lactate, the 30 cc per kilogram bolus, the vasopressors. Now, in the second quarter, this hospital did some PDSA cycles. They improved their repeat lactate within 6 hours. They improved their 30 cc per kilogram bolus, improved their vasopressors, and they really jumped up drastically on the measure. They essentially doubled their compliance with the Sepsis 1 measure. And so their experience mirrors the experience of a lot of our hospitals. As they get more familiar with the sepsis bundle, as they do PDSA cycles, they're sort of walking their way down the measure. And your quality improvement starts with screening protocols. Then it progresses to getting blood cultures before antibiotics. Then it progresses to getting that 30 cc per kilogram bolus, and so on. And so we're seeing that with a lot of our hospitals, that as they move down the metric, they are facing different challenges. Here are some of the small tests of change that hospital went through. So first they started looking at monthly data instead of quarterly data. Quarterly data was just too spread out. They then moved on to their RN-initiated screening protocol. Their initial experience with blood cultures before antibiotics did not work out too well. It was an isolated order and people weren't using it. When they bundled that blood culture order into a useful sepsis order set, then the physicians really started using it. Initially, their repeat lactates were not being drawn. They did some didactics and everything seemed to be going in the right direction. And then lo and behold, they had some hospitalist turnover, and the new hospitalist just hadn't really received that education, wasn't fully on board, and their numbers dropped off precipitously in December 2016. They then protocolized it. So they made that repeat lactate a reflex order. If the initial lactate was greater than 2, it automatically orders a repeat lactate. That took care of the problem. They were able to move on to sepsis order sets for the RNs that they could actually initiate. And they're still having trouble getting the RNs to take agency with that and actually initiate orders without physician permission. That's kind of changing the culture of the hospital and is slow to start. They have already created a suggested antibiotic resource for physicians, basically an order folder that the physicians are finding very useful. And now they're at the point where they have posted an ED scoreboard in a central location, so all staff can see how we're doing on sepsis. Even float nurses can come in and see what the department is working on at that time. And so there's a lot of positive progress here, and like I said, every one of those bars is increasing because of regular PDSA cycles and small tests of change. We asked this hospital, what are your current issues? What are your next steps? As I said, failures were occurring more downstream in the metric. They have now gotten to the point where there are so few failures that they can do individual peer review, which is very cool. And after 6 months, they're seeing mostly antibiotic failures. So in June, there was a patient who received only vancomycin, and the question was, why was it only vanc? What was the barrier for the provider to providing broad spectrum antibiotics? And then there was a community-acquired pneumonia patient who received only azithromycin, and the ceftriaxone had been canceled. So this hospital is looking into why it was canceled and whether that's a failure in the system. Is there a new opportunity for a PDSA cycle to improve that to make sure that doesn't happen next time? Their next steps are monthly peer review, not only for physicians on failed sepsis measures, but also for RNs on screening compliance. And then they're actually looking into incorporating procalcitonin lab in for sepsis protocol. That's not part of the metric, but the metric is the floor, not the ceiling. So of course you can do more sophisticated sepsis care as well. These are some of the common challenges that we are seeing with the Sepsis 1 measure. We're not going to get into all of these now. We actually have separate videos on the 30 cc per kilogram bolus and the repeat lactate, so check out those videos. And we are winning. If you look at the Wisconsin statewide sepsis mortality data between 2010 and 2017, we have seen our largest drop in mortality shortly after the CMS sepsis bundle was announced. So since we started keeping sepsis data, we have seen our biggest drop in the last year. Just something to encourage our members that this actually works. And as always, if you want additional resources, check out the WHA Quality Center or the Michigan Hospital Association community page. And with that, good luck treating sepsis. We at WHA are here for you and always available for questions. Thank you.